What? They found a pit, okay? Full of bodies. Well, very sad to say, but we've seen plenty of pits full of bodies this war. Huh? Not civilians, officers. Officers? What? Polish officers. Thousands of Polish officers in uniform. I don't even know what to say, man. No, I don't understand. Okay. Yeah, well, keep me posted, yeah? All right. Yeah, bye. April 16th, 1943. So you launch a big offensive, a big one in the skies, but it doesn't actually do nearly the damage it's supposed to do to the enemy. But you don't want to look like a failure, so you just make stuff up, solid results, and present that as fact to your boss. Wait, can that possibly work? Well, if you're in the Japanese military and it's 1943, then yes, it can. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Japanese Combined Fleet Commander Isoroku Yamamoto flew to Rabaul to run Operation E-Go, an aerial offensive, which was unsuccessful in its initial stages. The Soviets launched an assault against Krimskaya in the Kuban, and in Tunisia, Giovanni Messe's Axis forces were pushed back from their Wadi Akarit defenses. They then pulled back towards their Enfidaville defenses. I didn't have time to talk about it last week, but the Allies in Tunisia did have one chance left to beat Messe's army before it could reach the defenses in and around Tunis itself, the Fondouk Pass. Midway between El Getar and Tunis, the Margalil River threaded a narrow pass through the eastern dorsal where Fondouk, a few adobe hovels and a mosque, straddled Highway 3. Less than 1,000 yards wide, the defile was bracketed on the north by a stony pinnacle named Jebel Rorab, and on the south by an equally stony escarpment named Jebel Haureb. That's nicely descriptive, but there are a few things to add to that. Germans infested these slopes and had for months. They had blasted gun positions from the shale and built bivouac dens in the cliffs. Gunners registered their artillery on the open approaches from the west and calibrated their mortars on all the dead spaces below the ridges. Fields of fire were nearly perfect. We saw in late March the failure of an American attempt to force the pass. Then American Commander George Patton had ordered Charles Ryder's 34th Infantry Division to go out in that area and make a lot of noise, but don't try to capture anything. The French warned them, though, that the American approaches were flat and exposed, and this was a really bad idea, but no dice. Orders are orders. Last week on the 8th, Ryder's men went forward at 3 a.m. There had been airstrikes tentatively planned to help them out, but communications issues and confusion as to the time of attack put pad to that. The sun rose to reveal 6,000 American soldiers creeping across grass, too short for a rabbit to hide in. They took fire from both Jebel heights. Enemy artillery found them, they were hit hard, and by midday, there was no forward movement at all, and they were 700 meters short of Jebel Haureb. Tanks came up to assist, but 4 of them were on fire within minutes, so the rest withdrew. Later that afternoon, the same procedure was repeated. They did persevere, however, and by 3:30 the 9th, they took Jebel Rorab. But British Corps Commander John Crocker, to whom the 34th is attached, was ordered by Army Group Commander Harold Alexander to just crash the pass with an armored spearhead. He sent one in, and they ran into a minefield a few hundred meters deep. They were ordered to plow through, and enemy mines and anti-tank guns destroyed 32 tanks. And yet, the assault did make it through. Well, not that specific spearhead, but another armored unit, the 16th 5th Lancers. They found a navigable path, and by late afternoon the 9th, tanks emerged from the path 1.5 kilometers beyond Fondouk village. They broke through, but even though they unhinged the enemy, they were too late to catch him. Messe's forces passed Kairouan the night of the 8th. The morning of the 10th, as this week begins, over 100 British Sherman tanks are through the pass. This evening, Kairouan falls. A great opportunity had been lost. Messe's troops closed on the Tunis bridgehead at Enfidaville, 40 miles south of the capital, and the most formidable position occupied by the Axis since the loss of El Alamein 5 months earlier. Now the Tunisian campaign would become a siege. How long it would last was anyone's guess. Fondouk had been an ugly battle for the Allies. Alexander's strategy had been plotting, Crocker's tactics impoverished. A bad plan was badly executed, and the long stern chase up the Tunisian littoral had come up short despite the capture of 6,000 Germans and 22,000 Italians in the past month. But okay, sure. There's also this. They are currently taking 1,000 prisoners a day, and it seems fairly obvious that they are going to, soon enough, win in Tunisia. And as Rick Atkinson points out, it will join Midway, El Alamein, Stalingrad, and Guadalcanal as milestone victories for the Allies. I mean, there were like 250,000 Axis troops now stuck in one corner of Tunisia with nowhere to go, and the entire African continent and the Mediterranean Sea will fall to the Allies. That's a pretty big deal. On the 10th, the British enter Sfax, and on the 12th capture Saucet, 40 kilometers south of Enfidaville. They make solid contact with 9th Corps from 1st Army near Kairouan. The whole Allied front is now joined together. Overall Commander Dwight Eisenhower says, "We are at last operating on a single battle line and have placed the enemy in a position that, to say the least, is highly embarrassing for him." Eisenhower is American, and the American troops in the region are on the move this week. On the 11th, 100,000 American soldiers begin marching northward on 4 roads towards the enemy. They have 240 kilometers to go, and as planned, a vehicle passes them every 37 seconds, day and night. They are putting the desert behind them and heading towards Beja. There they are to join in the final assault as conceived by Eisenhower and Alexander. 300,000 troops, 20 divisions strong, backed by 1,400 tanks, attacking along a 220-kilometer arc from the Mediterranean Sea west of Bizerta all the way around to Enfidaville by the Americans and the French, the 1st Army, and the 8th Army. Thing is, the whole big attack is planned to be virtually wholly British and Commonwealth forces. Patton is not happy about this, considering that there are 467,000 American troops in this part of Africa by now, which is over 60% of the total British and American forces. After some real complaining, the 4 divisions of American 2nd Corps will now be part of the main attack. And it seems they will have an enemy willing to fight. For as we saw, after last week's meeting with Adolf Hitler, Italian leader Benito Mussolini agreed that the Tunisian bridgehead must be held at all costs, and tells this to Theater Luftwaffe boss Smiling Albert Kesselring in Rome the 12th. So on the 13th, Heeresgruppe Africa commander Hans-Jürgen von Arnim is told there will be no evacuation. So they'll be playing defense in Tunisia, but the Axis are making offensive plans for the Soviet Union, specifically for an attack on the Kursk salient. This is too obvious an attack place for any surprise, so it will instead be massive. Gunther von Kluge, Kurt Zeitzler, and Wilhelm Keitel are all in favor. Heinz Guderian and Erich von Manstein are opposed, even though it was originally Manstein's idea. So now on the 15th, Hitler explains the basic plans for Operation Citadel, an attack on the Kursk salient that will give the Germans the initiative if it succeeds both rapidly and totally. He says, the victory at Kursk must be a beacon to the world. But it really is the obvious place to attack, to the Soviets as well. Okay, last week, Soviet commander Georgy Zhukov toured the Voronezh front, and he was given the results of an enormous reconnaissance operation that the Red Army and Red Air Force had undertaken to estimate enemy strength. On the 8th, he turned in his strategic appreciation to Joseph Stalin, and that was the basis for a bunch of planning that happens this week. His appreciation says, first, that after the Axis losses of the winter fighting, it does not seem that they have the reserves to renew attacks to take the Caucasus, break through on the Volga, and massively envelop Moscow. Their offensive must be more narrowly limited, and its basic aim will be the capture of Moscow. The first stage looks like it will be a gigantic attack with perhaps as many as 15 tank divisions to outflank Kursk from the northeast from Orel and the southeast from Belgorod with heavy Luftwaffe support. There will be a supporting attack from around Vorozhba towards Kursk from the southwest, which would try to surround and destroy 7 Soviet armies. Eventually, the enemy will try to reach a line from Yelets, Voronezh, Liska, and then once covered from the southeast, will try to outflank Moscow through Ranenburg and Ryazan. Zhukov writes, It is to be anticipated that this year the enemy will put the chief burden for offensive operation on his armored divisions and his air force, since at the present moment his infantry is much less ready for offensive operations than in the previous year. At the present time, the enemy deploys in front of the Central and Voronezh fronts up to 12 tank divisions, and by drawing off 3 to 4 tank divisions from other sectors, the enemy could commit against our forces at Kursk up to 15 to 16 tank divisions with a strength of some 2,500 tanks. So that the enemy should smash himself to pieces against our defenses, in addition to the measures to strengthen the anti-tank defenses of the Central and Voronezh fronts, we must, as speedily as possible, draw off from passive sectors 30 regiments of anti-tank artillery and concentrate as many aircraft as possible in Stavka Reserve, so that massed air attacks, in cooperation with armor and rifle formations, can smash enemy attacks and thus frustrate his offensive plans. He closes the whole strategic appreciation with this: an offensive on the part of our troops in the near future, aimed at forestalling the enemy, I consider to be pointless. It would be better if we grind down the enemy in our defenses, break up his tank forces, and then, introducing fresh reserves, go over to a general offensive to pulverize once and for all his main concentrations. On the 12th is a Stavka conference in Moscow. Zhukov, Chief of Staff Alexander Vasilevsky, and his deputy Alexei Antonov have prepared maps, calculations, and proposals, and the Central and Voronezh fronts have submitted operational plans. Zhukov and Vasilevsky are pretty sure Kursk is the most dangerous area, and that the Axis plan to break through there at any cost, destroy the Central and Voronezh fronts, and regain the strategic initiative. The rest of the front, the Axis would probably play defense, for they can't have the strength for multiple offensive operations. Stalin duly met his commanders late in the evening. To the reports and the appreciations he listened as never before. He agreed that the main striking forces were clustered around the Kursk salient, but his overriding concern remained for the Moscow Axis. To cover all eventualities, it was agreed to begin the construction of deeply echeloned defense systems on all the main axes, but to give priority to Kursk. So by the end of this week, the systematic movement of reserves has begun, and the planned defense, followed by an offensive once they've worn down the enemy, has begun taking shape. But the Soviets are making attacks of their own this week. Ivan Maslenikov's North Caucasus front resumes the offensive he called off last week, this week down in the Kuban. On the 14th, he sends 4 armies against Richard Ruoff's 17th Army's whole front, looking for a weak spot. He does not find one. One of those Soviet armies, Andrei Grechko's 56, does, however, manage to reach the outskirts of Krimskaya the 15th. But today, the 16th, the Luftwaffe flies over 1,500 sorties over the whole region, and by the afternoon it is clear that Maslenikov has failed once again. Something else that fails this week, though for the Axis powers, is the continuation of Operation E-Goal, which we saw begin last week. Well, okay, fails and fails, but I'll get to that in a minute. This huge Japanese aerial offensive continues the 11th, 12th, and 14th. The 11th, 22 Japanese Val bombers and 72 Zeros are engaged by 50 Allied fighters, who shoot down 6 Japanese planes without a loss. The 12th is an attack on Port Moresby. This involves 131 Zeros and 43 Betty medium bombers targeting Allied planes on the ground and transport ships in the harbor. The Japanese lose 5 planes, but do manage to penetrate the aerial defense screen and destroy several Allied bombers on the ground, though they do not damage any Allied ships. The attack the 14th is against Milne Bay and the 3 Dutch transports there by 188 total Japanese planes. Local cloud cover and nearby mountains make this always a tricky proposition, but one transport is beached, though other ships are damaged and dozens of men are killed or injured. Thing is, for what these attacks are supposed to accomplish, they are failures. But Yamamoto, who calls off the operation today, the 16th, believes his men's announcement that they shot down 175 Allied planes and sank 28 ships, including a cruiser. In reality, they sank 5 ships and shot down 25 planes and lost 55 planes of their own. Yamamoto decides to go to the Solomons to personally congratulate the air crews. there is a darker announcement that comes this week as well. At 9:15 on the 12th, on the German radio, comes the announcement of the discovery in the Katyn forest of a giant 28 by 16 meter pit filled with 12 layers of the bodies of Polish officers in full uniform, all having been shot in the back of the neck by pistols. As the layers begin to be exhumed, they estimate the total number of bodies to be around 10,000. On the 16th, the Polish government in exile issued a statement asking for a Red Cross investigation. Spartacus covers this in far more detail on the War Against Humanity series, so go check that out. And here are 2 notes to end the week. General Rudolf Schmidt, commander of the German 2nd Panzer Army, is relieved of his command the 10th. See, his brother, Hans Thilo Schmidt, sold sensitive German military information to the French for many years before the war. The Gestapo has now arrested Hans Thilo and has found a bunch of letters of Rudolf's in which he is very critical of both Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. He is replaced as Panzer Commander by Heinrich Klossner. And today, as the week ends, the Japanese 11th Army starts gathering to make an offensive in Hubei to extend Japanese control to the upper Yangtze River. And that brings me to the end of yet another week of the war, the 190th to be precise. A week of Soviet failure in the Kuban and Allied frustration in Tunisia as the enemy continues slipping away, though his ability to continue to do so is ever more constricted. And the discovery of all those dead Polish officers, killed on Soviet-held territory before the Axis got there. Joseph Goebbels writes in his diary of the 14th about the boon this is for anti-Bolshevik propaganda. The Soviet government denies the charges, of course, claiming that they are the bodies of Polish POWs who had been doing construction work and were caught by the invading German army, or more specifically, fell into the hands of the German fascist hangman. Władysław Sikorski, Polish prime minister in exile, does not plan on just letting this go. And, spoiler, Stalin will soon break off diplomatic relations with the Poles and accuse them of collaborating with the Germans. He will also try to get the Western Allies to recognize the Union of Polish Patriots, the ZPP, as the official Polish government in exile over Sikorski's. This is a very recently organized pro-communist group in the Soviet Union. Never ends, does it, you know? Wheels within wheels within wheels. Imagine yourself trying to be one of the Allies this spring. With one country in Africa that doesn't want another soldiers to fight big battles. The armies have different racial attitudes which boil over. There are 3 Chinese governments. Which way will India turn? If France is freed, what government will there be in France? It never ends. And now this. Thousands of dead officers from one country murdered by another country they're now supposed to be on the same side with, but killed before when that second country invaded the first one, which doesn't really lessen the sting. Sometimes you have to be amazed they can even fight together at all. I suppose terror and extermination breed strange bedfellows. You should very much check out the War Against Humanity series, and you can do so right here. It is a dark but necessary to be covered aspect of the war. These are our newly commissioned officers in the Time Ghost Army. The Time Ghost Army member of the week is Patrick Bartel. It was even his birthday this week. It is the Time Ghost Army that finances all of our productions. So for us to continue this, and the War Against Humanity series, and more, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.